Good morning, everyone. Welcome. First up, we have Kevin Schuma, Vice President of Product Management here at CA, and he's going to talk about what's new in Datacom 15.0, 15.1. Kevin.
Thank you, Nancy. Hey, guys. Welcome, everybody, to the CTC 2.5, our virtual in-between CTC conferences. Later on today, I'll talk a little bit about the next in-person CTC conference, but we want to get this started. So today we have 4 sessions that are going to be targeted towards the DBA systems programmers for the Datacom and ideal environments. We're going to talk about the Datacom 15.0, 15.1 session here. As the day goes on, we'll talk about some special things with 15.1 features. We'll talk about the roadmap for beyond 15.1, etc. And then on Thursday, I want to remind you that Thursday morning, September 21st at 9 a.m. Eastern, we're going to kick off a morning of application development sessions towards tuning applications, mobile applications, and other things. So we've kind of broke this up into 2 mornings to make it easier for you guys to set aside the time. Today, this morning, is all about the DBA systems programmer, things that are in the database. And again, on Thursday, we'll be doing the application session. With that, I need to get started. Nancy is our host here, and she will quickly remind me when I fall behind, so I'll need to go through pretty quickly. I do want to allow some time at the end of the presentation for you guys to ask questions. So if you would, write down your questions and save them up, and we'll have them at the end of the presentation. So off we go with what's new in 15.0 and 15.1. Well, I was asked to give this session. I thought about it, and I thought, it's going to be really hard to try to fit this all into 1-hour session. Typically, we do these for each release, and they're probably an hour to an hour and a half each release at least. So what I have to do here is to really highlight some of the enhancements in 15.0 and 15.1 that I think are really important for the client base. So understand that I am not going to be going over every enhancement that we have. It would probably be a 4-hour sort of a 4-hour overview of the entire release. So I'm going to pull out and highlight the enhancements that I think are probably of the best value for everyone. So today's discussion is going to start with 15.0, and then we'll talk about 15.1 and our continuous delivery model, and then hopefully a summary and QA. So with 15.0, we have delivered a 15.0 version of our products for the core, services, server, IPC, and ideal. Now, that doesn't mean that the other products that are out there, VCM Transparency, DL1T, et cetera, are not part of the plan and don't work with 15.0. But what it does mean is that the other releases are all working with this 15.0 release. And I would ask, if you have, if you're on the phone, could you please mute your line, because we're getting some background noise and it will affect some of the other people. Just either mute your line locally or hit *6, I believe, is the mute command. Thank you. So the features that we're trying to highlight for 15.0 are our enhanced zip processing, 64-bit data buffers, dynamic maintenance, operations for 24/7, SQL, ideal, XML support, and server enhancements. So we're going to each one of these in details as we go forward. So first of all, enhanced zip processing. Hopefully everyone saw that in 14.01, which was a maintenance delivery for the 14.0 release, our zip exploitation jumped dramatically. We went from 33%, or more or less around 33% in release 12 to about 50% in release 14 base, and then up over 80% in 14.01. We're at a very high percentage of zip offload in the 14.01 release. However, what we noted was that there was still some capabilities, some things we could do to enhance the zip offload in 15.0. So we've actually done some internal enhancements to 15.0 that did make more operations available to zip. We also did features in 15.0 that directly aren't zip connected. However, because you're doing things that are memory resident, like 64-bit data buffers, allow you to keep more data in memory. A memory operation is zippable. So if you can have 64-bit data buffers and you can double the number of data buffers, you're going to allow us to do a lot more in memory, which then allows us to do a lot more with zip. It also gives us the capability to do less I/O, because I/O is realistically the one thing that the database can't do on a zip processor. So if we eliminate I/O and we move towards these large data buffer pools and 64-bit memory, we can actually push our zip well above that 80% mark. I will tell you that one of my sites that I've worked with directly, we looked at the production environment about 3 months ago, and they were running over 96% zip offload, which is a tremendous accomplishment. I don't know if there's much more that we can do to push us further on zip. So there are a lot of things that we're doing that in 15.0 that while they directly don't affect or aren't specifically zip targeted, they do help zip. And included with that is that you can do things like our online defrag utility and other utilities that we have that while they drive I/O, the work part of it is done in MUF, so you can actually do that with, again, the zip processors. And then we're going to talk about some new startup options. The one thing that I see as a major feature, and this was actually something that we delivered as part of the base for 15.0, was a PPF. It's part of the base for 15.1, excuse me. But something that we originally started out with is that this is an option that would be good for clients that are using zip processing on small to medium sites. However, what we've learned is that in every implementation where we've turned on this new multi-user startup option called SMP task using IEAV, we've actually improved performance. We've reduced CPU consumption, general processor CPU consumption, and did not increase zip. It actually just made it better for everybody. And I'll show an example of this in the next couple of slides. Now, we also have a second option for those folks that are using an I/O task. I/O task is something we've gotten away from. We don't really think that a lot of clients need it, but some folks have been using it. With the I/O task, we also introduced a new feature called I/O task using IEAV. So the default for both of these features was delivered and will continue to be no for the time being. However, going forward, at some future point, we may flip this on as a default of yes because it benefits everyone and allow you to turn it off if you don't like it. If you're familiar with Datacom, we do this a lot when we bring in new things like 64-bit memory processing for the index buffers. We allow clients to decide to turn it off if they wanted to run the old way. So for right now, these are options you will have to turn on by specifying the multi-user startup options as yes. But my general recommendation is to test it in your test systems, but to move quickly to this as soon as you can because it will save general purpose CPU. And that's the CPU you pay for. So what do we do with this using IEAV support? Basically, it replaces the process that was used to start and stop and resume the workload managed SRBs, the SRBs that are zip dispatchable. And some sites, we've seen about a 20% to 40% GP CPU reduction when they turn this on. It just goes away. Now, the common here is your mileage may vary. I did a test system just last week with a very small site that was doing a benchmark, and they only saw about a 5 to 8% CPU reduction. So it will depend on your workload and how much activity of starting and stopping the zip processors that you have. I expect a very small system only running one task won't have a whole lot of starting and stopping because it's mainly going to be on the primary SRB. But what we can tell, everyone will benefit from it. As I said earlier, typically this will reduce your GP CPU consumption without increasing the zip. But here's a report that we want to show you. This report comes out in your multi-user shutdown statistics as far as the SysSprint. If you're a 14.0 user, you'll see that you will have this PHCB SRB use summary. This is a new set of lines that comes out at the bottom that starts with that totals of above values. That line basically got added by a PTF in 14.02 and was available to the 14.02 users. It's part of the 15.0 and 15.1 release. You should be able to look at your multi-user shutdown stats and see this page being printed out right now. Now, the key about this is that the box that you see circled in red on the top graph is the box that provides the amount of CPU that we're using to start those SRB SMP tasks. Now, some of the CPU, for some sites using XCF or CCI connections, they will have other CPU in this other SRB box. So the other SRB box is basically CPU that's spent on a general purpose processor that's not on a zip. So while it may go down drastically with the IEAV yes options, it won't go to zero. You'll most likely have some amount of work going in. So this is a benchmark. This is a system I have that's very easy for me to redo the workload, exactly the same workload every time, go through and do the same amount of processing. And what you see here is that we were able to drop the other SRB processing from about 7 CPU seconds down to just a little more than 1 CPU second. Now, when we look at that, that's not a whole lot, but remember it's a very small test. But you have to consider that when you look over to the left there, you see the column called TCD. That's the general purpose processor that we would normally report. So in this case, we went from a combined amount of 8.96 general purpose processor CPU that we see up here on this externally measured box. And then we changed that by turning the IEV on, and we see that our general purpose processor actually spent on the second exactly the same test is 3.4 CPU seconds. So what we were able to do is drop the overall CPU consumption across the board. We went from 40 CPU seconds on both GP and ZIP to 30 CPU seconds on GP and ZIP. And we also significantly reduced the amount of GP CPU. What this means is a client, basically, who's working with us used to see a graph of about 80 to 90%, 88% here of ZIP utilization that really was, if we didn't measure that other SRB, got to 64% when you measure the other XRB. Now we see that when you see 86% internally measured, the actual external measurement, and this is the one everybody cares about, this is what you pay for, is the 80%. So we have a significantly better profile. Now we're going to move on very quickly here, but just take it for this, that this is one of the key facilities that you need to turn on for 15.0 and 15.1 because it won't hurt you and most likely is going to save you CPU. If you have any kind of questions on this or want to do a benchmark and work with us directly, please reach out to us and we'll walk you through this. Okay. Okay, there we go. So the next feature we want to talk about is data buffers in 64-bit. Again, this is a major enhancement for us. We think this is the last big nut to crack. We'll talk about 15.1 and some of the other 64-bit stuff we've done, but realistically, when we move the data buffers into 64-bit, we have almost completely removed our 31-bit footprint. So we have a very small 31-bit footprint now, maybe a couple hundred meg, well within the 2 gig limit, and we now have the ability to have data buffers, 64-bit data buffers of significant value. Again, I would ask you if you could please mute your lines. We are getting a lot of background noise. I appreciate it. Thank you. So most shops limit the data buffers because of 31-bit memory, you know, the 2 gig max, and a lot of shops don't even have a full 2 gig to use per address space. Most shops are limited on how many of their data buffers they could have. So if you have the large data buffers, you're using a 27998 recommended block size, which is like half track. You had to have 28K data buffers. You know, that max you could get would be about 37,000 data buffers. You couldn't use the full 99,999 data buffers. You couldn't really push them out there. With the 64-bit now, we can basically move data buffers. They're above the line, above the bar, and you can basically use as many as you need. And we go back to the tuning of adding data buffers till you no longer use them. You know, one of those things of balancing how many buffers should you have versus how much activity or reuse you have. With the 64-bit data buffers, We want to make note that you are using the same storage that you use for covered and virtual databases. So if you are going to move your data buffers and significantly increase the number of data buffers you have, make sure that you have the 64-bit mem limit set to either 0 to unlimited or no limit, or to a larger size. So again, if you're using covered and virtual, you probably already have your 64-bit limit set. You may want to raise that if you're going to move 64-bit buffers. We typically recommend running with no memory limit, but most systems programmers want to have some 64-bit and 31-bit limits set. What does the 64-bit buffers do for us? Well, in 14.0 we introduced the index and DXX, and we see that they were working really well, but we were limited with the data and data 2. Now with 15.0 we have all the buffers in 64-bit, which makes a new feature that we had in 14.0 really start to make sense. So in 14.0 we introduced the multiple buffer pools, right? So in 14.0 you could have your IXX, your syspool parameter of IXX and DXX buffers, but then you also could have your extra buffer pools, your additional buffer pools that had buffer pools set up for groups of data sets. Well, when we run into the fact that, yeah, that's great for index and DXX, we still had a problem with data and data 2. Even if we did set up additional buffer pools in 14.0, we were still limited to how much space we have in 31-bit. And in most cases, the client had already used up most of the 31-bit space with the standard data 2 buffer pools, or what you specify in the data pool parameter, and they weren't able to actually add more buffer pools for DXX if they did, or for data. If they did, what they typically would do is have to cut down data and data 2 to create the extra buffer pools or special buffer pools. Suddenly with 15.0 and the ability to put data buffers above the line, we now have the ability to really truly implement a feature that has been available since 14.0, which is to create these additional buffer pools and have specific sets of data sets or data areas and index areas with their own buffer pools. We can create buffer pools for accounts payable that are different buffer pools than accounts receivable. We can give special processing capabilities to special application sets. It does introduce complications and tuning and all those other things. My first thing would be expand data and data 2 and use it. But if you need to and you want to use extra buffer pools, now we really have the space to do it. One of the first things that comes out of most people's mind is if you are comparing, if you're going to go to 64-bit buffers and now you have the ability to have all these extra buffer pools, how does that compare to covered and virtual? And the really answer is it's one of those things that you're going to have to test on your application. They both use 64-bit memory. They both have the same constraints that you need to give it memory. And, oh, by the way, even though 64-bit memory is going to still be backed up by real memory, so you can't just throw unlimited 64-bit out there and not get some sort of paging or whatever. But they both have the same memory kind of constraints. They're both just allocated out of that 64-bit pool. The difference between the two that I see is that covering favors one data area over others. So if I'm going to cover a data area, or an index or DXX for that matter, I'm giving that index or DXX its own special cache to do performance processing. So anytime that data area, index area gets accessed, I'm going to give it backup memory or a cache, which we're calling covered, that will allow that processing to be faster. But it's basically going to be, it's based on or set for favoring that one data set. So I can't make all my indexes faster. I'm going to make this index faster. Buffer pools favor active processing versus dormant. So having multiple buffer pools or even very large index and data buffer pools says that we're going to make the active processing favor. So the more activity you have on a given data set, it suddenly becomes more favored over other data sets. So with covering, we have the problem of, yes, we can give this data set a specifically high performance capability, But if it's no longer being used or it's only used at the end of the month, we're suddenly wasting that coverage space when it's not heavily used. But, you know, it's one of those things. You have to kind of value that. With the higher buffer pools, if a data set goes dormant, the buffers just get picked up by whatever else is active. So the buffer pools actually give you a better first in, first out, higher processing rate. So I would actually favor, if I was starting out today, I would favor using buffer pools, large buffer pools versus the covered and covered settings. However, that's not the way we start today, and we have to keep, you know, we keep moving forward. Now, the other thing that I do see as a downside with buffer pools is that they can be influenced by heavy I/O applications. So if you have an online system and you're covering certain areas that give online high performance, if you switch that memory to buffer pools, and you suddenly get a batch application running very heavily that you really don't want to give priority to, it could steal the buffers away from, because it's the heavy. Remember, buffer pools will favor the active applications. So a batch application could actually, in the case of large buffer pools, kind of take over the buffer pools and have a negative effect on the online system. It won't mean the online system doesn't get buffers. It means that the online system won't have the likelihood of finding a previously used data block in memory. So covering does have a benefit there, because you can, if there's specific data sets that are only for online, by covering them, you'll give them a special thing. Now, going the same route, you could set up a secondary buffer pool specifically for the online data sets. So all of this comes down to both of them are great, both of them improve performance, both of them use zip processing. Which one do you choose? Unfortunately, online reorg with Datacom now, we have multiple ways of doing it. This is multiple ways of using 64-bit memory to improve processing. But I really do think this is a benefit of the 15.0 that we can now use a feature that we introduced in 14.0. So another major feature that we have in the 15.0 line is the dynamic index maintenance. And I won't go through these individually, but basically we have the feature, the capabilities to add indexes or delete indexes while processing's up. It's a 24/7 capability. This is something that is complex, and for large databases will take time. And we've had experience with customers where adding a physical key took several days. But they didn't interrupt processing. They didn't have to do a backup and load. They were able to basically do all the work while their normal processing was going on. Really what we want to point out here is adding a key is probably a lot easier and a lot less scary than deleting a key. So we do have the step of a logical key delete, where you can go in and turn a key off. And when you turn the key off, it is still being maintained, but we won't allow applications to use the key. Therefore, after 2 or 3 or 4 months and you haven't seen any bad problems with your performance in SQL or SQL because they're missing a key, or from native applications failing because they can't find the key, you can then do the physical delete. So we did feel more uncomfortable, I guess you'd say, for the delete key, that we needed to do a logical delete first, making sure that, you know, you don't want to spend 2 days deleting a key and then find out that your CEO's end-of-month statement does not work now because you deleted his key. So let's not do that. I don't want to get in trouble or called on the carpet, but we do the logical key delete and then wait a reasonable period of time. What's reasonable? At some shops it may be 6 months, and then the physical key delete. But these are all new processes. I will say that they are specifically complex processes that do need you to read the DBA guide, go through and understand the steps before you attempt to do it. But our support staff will be glad to walk you through it. Clients have done this successfully with very large databases. 24/7 operations. We want to make sure that as we go forward with 15.0, 15.1, we give you more capabilities to do things without interrupting the system. We created in 14.0 the ability to move data areas and do different things. We've had since, I think, 12.0 the ability to dynamically extend data sets, data areas, and indexes. But we ran into problems with our virtual things. If you ran out of space in a virtual database, you had to suck the must down in order to reallocate it larger. These were all problems for us. So we've now added capabilities of doing dynamic extend of virtual indexes and data. So we allow you to extend the LXX. The SQL CPM is a virtual environment, but we do also have special ways of going around it and extending it. We allow you to reset the log area. There's very few people who have ever done this. The log will actually run out of the sequence numbers if you don't cycle must. We now allow that to be reset automatically. URI reuse. A table can only have 4 billion data records before it runs out of URIs. I'm sorry, a data area. So clients have actually done that. Now they're up 24/7. They're using online reorg, et cetera, et cetera. They will run out of URIs. So we have the capability of reusing URIs. It's a special process. And there's a lot more we've done for 24/7. From a data management and a must management perspective, we have features out there that clients can stay up 24/7 for unlimited numbers or periods of time. Some SQL highlights. SQL Sourcecast gives you the capability of to monitor and allow the system to process for Datacom server. It gives us a way that we can go out there and see what's going on with these server queries. One of the biggest challenges we have with Datacom server is most of the products that are generating SQL don't really show us the SQL. I mean, it's some third-party task that's running, and it's running a query. It generates the SQL and runs it through server. So you don't get an operational aspect where the DBA creates the SQL, and then we go from there. So the SQL cache gives us two things. One is the ability to see the SQL that's coming through and have the ability, hopefully, to go back to the third party or to the programmer and say, hey, this query here's the syntax you're generating. Can we make this more efficient? And the second thing it does, it actually allows us to capture SQL queries that are repeated over and over and over again, and when you re-execute them, it will actually execute them without having to do the verification step. So there are cases with SQL where it will take more work for us to validate the SQL statement than it takes to actually execute the SQL statement. So everything coming in from Datacom server is considered dynamic, so that means we have to validate it every time, even if it's the same exact query 1,000 times in a row. The SQL Sourcecast allows us to run that query once. And the second time through, we don't have to revalidate it because we have it in the source cache. We know what it is. Now, we're expanding our capabilities with source cache. 15.0 was our first introduction of it. As we go forward, we see this as a basis to allow us to actually even go in and not only monitor, but even improve the SQL that the source cache is saving. So it's a great first start for making the performance of these dynamic applications, dynamic SQL applications running. We also added in 15.0 the ability to do SQL DDL around the database area concepts. And this is just for shops that want to be able to create the entire Datacom environment via SQL DDL. So they don't want to use Data Dictionary to create that basic database environment. This is just an extension. It really doesn't do anything more than the dictionary commands in the background. If we do use these functionality to create database, create area functionality, we do have some special utility functions that have to be done first to pre-initialize the data areas. Most sites won't be using this unless they've got a SQL-only standard that doesn't allow them to use anything but SQL DDL to produce databases. And then finally, in 15.0, Ideal 15.0, which does require Datacom 15.0 to be there first, has introduced the capability to handle XML support and XML documents. So with Ideal 15.0, you now have the capability to generate an XML document, to read XML documents, to produce them, and utilize it as part of our web services support for Ideal. I will mention that this is one of the requirements why Ideal 15.0 must go before Ideal or Datacom. I'm sorry, I said that incorrectly. Let me back up. You must be at Datacom 15.0 before you go to Ideal 15.0. And it's one of the reasons why we delayed the end of support for Ideal 14.0 was so that you could keep, you could upgrade the database to 15.0 first and allow Ideal to stay in 14.0 so you didn't have to do everything at one time. But once you do have a database at 15.0, you can update your Ideal to 15.0 and you'll get the XML Document Support. Some server highlights that are in 15.0. We basically added the capability for a server to support our shadow muff. So servers can now detect the 86 or 68 from a shadow muff, take over and reconnect automatically, so servers don't have to cycle when you swap from the production to the shadow. We added additional JDBC support, batch processing, additional ODBC support, and we've added some new performance tools to help our clients work with our TCP/IP processing. So, jumping on, 15.1 GA. So 15.1 was an incremental release. We did deliver it. It had multiple phases we worked with our validation clients, but it's also the basis for our continuous delivery model. So a client who comes into 15.1 is going to get a significant amount of enhancements that have occurred really after what we call complete GA. And this capability, the continuous delivery capability, is something that's going to allow us to keep the Datacom 15.1 brand running for a many number of years. The number one complaint that I have received over the years from our customers is that it takes too much time to do upgrades. So we're going to have a section later on by Al Johnson that will teach you how to do the upgrades and how to do it faster and how much better it is to go from 14 to 15 or directly to 15.1. You don't have to stop at 15. You're right to 15.1. But the goal here is that 15.1 could live many years before you have to do another upgrade, because upgrades are very, very costly at the client sites, require planning, require application verifications, all kinds of things. So we've gone into a continuous delivery model, which is also something that DB2 and several other databases have gone into, that will reduce the number of releases we'll deliver, but not the amount of functionality. So some of the highlighted features in 15.1, we're not going to talk about this in detail, but we are now delivering MetaCobalt support through Datacom. So clients that used to have the CA MetaCobalt product can get the same exact support for those MetaCobalt macros from the CA Datacom environment, meaning that clients who are a MetaCobalt client, once they get to Datacom 15.1, have the capability to continue processing MetaCobalt and get rid of the old CA MetaCobalt product, which is out of support now. This is really the only method forward for clients to continue using MetaCobalt. Great thing is, as part of Datacom, it's being kept current, it's QA'd by the Datacom staff now, and will be continued to be supported under the standards that CA has for Datacom. We'll also talk in detail in the next several slides about these other enhancements to MUF, our utilities, SQL, and 24/7 operations. So for the multi-user in 15.1, we've had faster restart. It will process faster. If you do have an app in, when you bring MUF up, it runs faster. We did continue with 64-bit. So with 15.1, you can now have your seek bufs, which are another buffer pool within Datacom, can be allocated in 64-bit. We have a tremendous number of expanded startup and console options. We now give you a lot more capabilities. We are introducing something for the very first time called best practices. When you start the multi-user up, we will start telling you if you're doing things that we think aren't best practices. It's very limited right now that we've got to break you guys into this. We want the MUF to start telling people, hey, you're not running optimal. You should have more data buffers. You should have more of these sort of things, and get more helpful so that the users don't have to be constantly looking at statistics and monitoring stuff. The multi-user, our goal long-term is for the multi-user to drive itself. We did add the support for large data rows in the variable LXX. Variable LXX came in back in 12.0. It was a high-performance option, much better than the fixed LXX, but it did have a limit on large row sizes. So we now support the full 32K row size on the variable LXX. As we did with the indexes, we talked about being able to add, drop, delete the indexes. We now have a function called index swap, where you can actually move an index. Again, this is 24/7. you can move an index from one IXX area to another without interrupting processing. This allows you to balance out your index areas. If you're using multi-data set indexes, this was a key requirement for people to introduce the new multi-data set indexes and not interrupt their applications while they took the databases down and rebuilt them. This gives you that capability. And you see that it's covered virtual 9 gig. I won't go into the details of that. That's one of Clyde's presentation later this morning. He'll talk about the top 5 things he likes about 15 and 15.1. So this is just marked here as one of Clyde's top 5. Utility enhancements. TV utility in 15.1 has a lot of different new enhancements added in. A lot of these are client requested. Tremendous number of enhancements that we provide that allow clients to do different things with TV utility. We also have a new functionality called CGSPR that gives you the capability to generate, regenerate URTs and CVTs and other Datacom macros from the load object. This is a really cool utility written by our Eric Johnson of our development staff here, and it really is helpful. If you've lost your source for your URTs, you can just point this utility at the load library that has the URT and it actually generates it back out for you. Same thing with CVTs. It's a really, if you're a system programmer taking over and you've got a system that you have no idea what the source is, but you know this is the object that's running, this is a really cool utility because you can generate back all those options so you don't have to try to guess what the system was running on. SQL enhancements 15.1, we have support for unsigned binary numbers. This was a problem clients were running into where they had old data that was not signed and SQL wasn't working with it correctly. You can now handle this. And we have new scalar functions for the character and bit level functions, as well as XML functions. For 24/7 operations, I'm not going to go into real detail with these. These are on Clyde's top 5, and we're going to spend another hour talking in detail, but we have several major features added for 24/7 operations in our 15.1 delivery. These are the latest online blockchains and online table move are 2 of the latest continuous delivery options we now have available for customers. So in summary, in that one brief period, and I don't think I took a breath, 15.0 and 15.1 have delivered significant functionality, but we're not stopping there. We have the continuous delivery model going on. Every month we have sprints around 15.1. We're adding additional capabilities to the 15.1 code line with minimal disruption to the user community. You will see that we've introduced, I would guess, at least 50 to maybe close even to 100 DARs for customers this way. This gives us the capability of quickly turning around a customer DAR where it's something that it can be fit in and it doesn't upset the system, additional methods they need, specific information that's missing. We can put these enhancements in place very quickly through our continuous delivery model. It really makes, the continuous delivery model really is what makes the Agile team function now. We have this ability to take something in that's high priority that we can get done quickly, shift our priorities, pivot, get it done, get it tested, get our customer validation team to validate it and get it out and solve a problem very quickly versus the old 3-4 years. If you just hang around for 4 more years, we'll fix that problem concept of waterfall. But it really takes that Agile team to do it. And the last big pitch here is, our validation customers are all fantastic people. They do a tremendous amount of work for the whole community. If you run into someone who's a validation customer for Datacom and you're a Datacom user, you got to reach out there and shake their hands and tell them thank you, because they basically work with us on every one of these features, whether it's their feature or not, and help us to get this through the system, tested, and implemented to benefit the whole Datacom ideal community. However, as with everything, we need more. We want more. We want you. So everyone that's on this call, if you're liking what you're hearing about 15.1 and capability of getting features and getting things turned around very quickly, we need you to reach out to Dale Russell, Kevin Shuma, Nancy Doucette, And we'll get you involved with the Validation Partner Program because this is really cool and allows us to turn things around quickly. So with that, I'll turn it over. Before I jump to questions, you'll see this slide everywhere. It's in every presentation. Put these dates on your board. We are going to have the full in-person, full week of Datacom Technical Conference 3.0 scheduled for Plano, Texas, April 16th of next spring. So please put this on your calendar, set aside the time, get the budget in place for it. It's going to be a fantastic event as the previous two events have been. So back to that, questions. And you can do a pound 6 to unmute.
Yeah, pound 6 to unmute.
Pound 6 to unmute and ask your questions. Okay. No questions.
Okay. Hold on. Hi, Kevin.
Hi, Owen.
Okay. Hi there. We're currently looking at converting several covered areas into multiple buffer pools, making use of that feature. And I see that you've recommended that in this session. Now, the IXX dataset contains both IXX and DXX blocks. So when those buffer pools, how can I find out exactly how many IXX blocks there are and how many DXX blocks so that I can size those buffer pools appropriately?
Well, the typical way I would start off with that is to do an index defrag, first of all, to shrink it down. That gives you the best number. And then there is a report, and I'll have to default to Robert Florian, and we'll I'll send you some JCL or something for that. There is a report that provides that information. I'm not sure exactly which. It's one of those IXX, type H reports or whatever. But I'll get that for you, Owen. It'll tell you how many blocks that you have in place on each of those.
Great. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, well, I thank everyone for joining this webcast. We're going to go ahead and end the recording now. We do have another webcast starting in 15 minutes. And with that webcast, there is a different link. We've decided to do each one of these webcasts as a separate broadcast so that we can record them and our users will be able to replay individual sections without having to try to find the specific session amongst the whole day. So thank you, everyone, for attending. Welcome to the new CTC virtual conference. This has been fun. And please set aside those dates, as we said earlier. Set aside the April week because we're going to have a lot more fun. You get to ask lots more questions. And we'll have a beautiful sunny week, I promise, fingers crossed, in Plano, Texas. Thanks, everyone.